I'm Frederica Freiberg. Welcome to Here and Now. The State Justice Department now says it will review the police investigation that led to putting the wrong man in prison for 18 years. Attorney General Peg Lautenschlager joins us. That man, Steven Avery, is now a free man thanks to DNA tests that proved him innocent. He talks with us about his case, his life, and what's next. But first, stormy times in Washington, D.C. long before Hurricane Isabel got to town. The politics of Iraq, questions over the Patriot Act, media monopoly votes, the economy. These are all issues I spoke with Senator Russ Feingold about when he stopped into the studio just a few hours ago. Senator Russ Feingold, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
So you got out of Washington while the getting was good. They pretty much battened down the hatches.
Yeah, they told us to get out of town, and I don't have to be asked twice to come back home. But yeah, they said they weren't sure how bad it was going to be, and they said Wednesday we'll vote this afternoon, and we'll come back on Monday.
Now, a lot of people have been talking about the cost of shutting down Washington, D.C., $67 million per day. Is that something that you think is okay?
Well, it's unfortunate because we have a terrible deficit at this time, but it's nobody's fault that this exceptional hurricane was coming through. I mean, they had this as a level 5 hurricane for a while there, and you know, the only responsible thing to do was to try to protect people, and I'm glad it didn't turn out as bad as it might have been.
Speaking of big money and things turning out quite not as well as they might have been, Iraq, people are calling for everything from the resignation of Rumsfeld to describing what's going on in Iraq now as a shooting gallery for our troops. So there's all of this talk, but what to do about it now?
Well, that is the question. I mean, we can all rehash the unfortunate mistakes that were made in terms of trying to justify this thing, which I think were rather poorly done by the administration. We can rehash the fact that they didn't have a good plan for the day after, but at this point we are there and we have our troops there. We've got to figure out a way to turn this over to the international community as soon as possible, and so that our troops can be relieved and so that the rest of the world can participate in trying to rebuild Iraq and trying to deal with the problem that we all agreed was there. We all agreed that the international community had a right to stop Saddam Hussein. The problem was when the Bush administration did it on its own, without a good plan, they put the American people and our troops in a situation that I don't think the troops should have been put into. So the answer is to work through the international community. I mean, even the French and the German leaders are talking about cooperating with us now, so maybe we can get to a different situation, but it is sooner rather than later that needs to be done. And
now there's a request for $87 billion more. And the price tag just keeps going up, and the deaths keep going up, and the international community, I mean, is any of this going to happen soon enough?
Well, I don't think it can be soon enough, and the problem is that we're not even sure why they decided to spend the first $75 billion the way they did. They refused, the administration repeatedly refused to answer the real questions, which is how long do you expect to be there, what will be the reaction of the Iraqi people, where will the weapons of mass destruction go? How will you deal with police issues, and so on? Until they really answered those questions for the next $87 billion, it's going to be hard for Congress to simply give them a blank check. On the other hand, we're not going to just leave our troops there. We have to support them militarily. So we're going to have to work together, but they need to be more open and admit some responsibility for having made some mistakes.
Is some of that coming forth now, though? It seems that there is, you know, some stepping away from some of the initial kind of assertions for why we were there.
Well, I think what's coming forth is just a further manufacturing of different reasons that because they didn't have apparently a clear reason why they wanted to do this, or they don't want to tell us why they really wanted to do this. It's what I've called for over a year the shifting justifications of this administration. So that's part of the problem. The bigger problem right now, though, since we already did it and whatever the justification was, so be it, the bigger problem is that now we have a situation where they're not answering questions about how they exactly plan to get us out of this situation. And they have a tendency to want to manage it. The Bush administration likes to hold all the information in. And there are times when that's appropriate. But this situation is so dangerous for the American people, for our troops, for our economy, that they have to be more open with Congress, they have to include us, and they have to include the American people. And I don't think President Bush in his statement really took responsibility for the mistakes that were made here. He needs to do that and then tell us openly how he plans to get us out of this situation.
On the U.S. Patriot Act, you voted against it, and now John Ashcroft is quoted as saying that people like yourself who were opposed to the provisions of the Patriot Act are hysterics. What do you make of that?
Well, I'm not surprised that the Attorney General and the President are scrambling on the USA Patriot Act because they really stubbed their toe in this. They didn't listen to me and a few others who at the time said, you know, this thing really isn't ready to pass. There are some real problems here with the provisions that relate to searching houses and taking library records and the like. They didn't want to listen. They just wanted to jam it through. Now they have a huge problem, not just on the political left and in the middle, but on the right, the conservatives, NRA members, and others are saying, you know, this thing really goes too far. So they're actually using hysterical language to defend the bill. The bill is one of the most unpopular pieces of legislation in my lifetime, and there are far more people than just the one guy that voted against it who thinks it needs to be fixed.
Ashcroft said that, you know, it's really not a threat because we really haven't used it.
Yeah, he can't have it both ways. First they say we absolutely have used this and we needed it desperately because otherwise we wouldn't be able to fight terrorism. Now they're shifting justification, just like Bush does, is to say, well, actually we haven't used it. Well, which is it? That it was essential or that we don't use it? They are obviously having a very hard time defending this piece of legislation, which, by the way, can be fixed. I proposed some reasonable legislation to fix it. They don't want to do that. They're back in their bunker on this, saying, well, we don't use it. Well, obviously they are using it, and they're very defensive about it.
And they could, I suppose, if they wanted. Now, on to campaign finance reform. We're doing kind of a potpourri here of Senator Feingold issues. But the U.S. Supreme Court is now hearing issues concerning this law. What happens if they decide to strike down some of these important provisions in this law?
I'm not going to think about that until they do that, and I don't think they'll do that. I think that the major provisions will be upheld by the United States Supreme Court. This law has been working very well since last November. We don't have members of Congress calling up people anymore and asking them for $100,000 or $500,000 or $1 million. And it would just be a great tragedy if the Supreme Court said, well, actually people have a right to ask for that kind of money and give that kind of money to campaigns and to parties. So if it happens, it happens. But I think we're going to be okay, and I'm not going to worry about the downside until it happens, and I don't think it will happen.
Obviously, we're coming into a huge election year. How will this look different for the voter at home under the provisions of this?
I think it already looks different. I think if people can remember back to a few years ago, these sort of negative attack ads, the sort of phony issue ads that they might remember from the presidential campaign, they were already out there at this time. They aren't this time. And the reason is that we have prohibited the unlimited soft money contributions. So people don't have these sort of unlimited funds of sort of squishy money to use for these ads. I think you're going to find that there is a much more positive type of campaign. There will be negative ads. But people will have to spend their hard money, the money they had a hard time raising actually, introducing themselves. And I think you're going to have a less corrupt and less crazy political year, although it still won't be perfect, and I still think it needs to be reformed. The removal of $500 million of squishy soft money from the system, I think will make a good difference.
On to another thing that we wanted to ask about, how it would make a difference to the person sitting at home reading their local newspaper or watching their local TV station. The FCC was blocked, with your help, from putting into effect these rules that would allow these kind of giant conglomerates, as well as multiple ownership of stations and newspapers in single cities. But what does that really mean to, you know, the guy sitting in Evansville?
I'll tell you, the guy sitting in Evansville is the guy that spoke up on this. And that's what's so exciting about it. I had started raising the question of conglomerations in the radio area. One company, Clear Channel, holding 1,400 radio stations. And then the FCC went ahead and on top of that wanted to make it, as you've indicated, that a company could own the newspaper, the radio, and the TV in one market. And it was the guy from Evansville. You know, I go to every Wisconsin county every year and hold a town meeting. Without me bringing it up, the guy in Evansville, the guy in Portage, the guy in Ashland, they were all bringing it up to me, and there was an avalanche of protests to the FCC itself by citizens, not through Congress, when this was proposed. So the Senate really did a good job by voting with 55 votes to strike it down.
Now, WTMJ in Milwaukee, though, is one of these places. They have the TV station, the radio station, the newspaper. Is Milwaukee less well served?
I think that is a problem for our system when one company can own too much. And what you understand from this, perhaps, is that it isn't just going to be one newspaper, one radio, or one TV. It would be several of them. In other words, the top two or three. I think if you got to that point in Milwaukee, it would be a serious problem. And there are those who believe already that having that kind of cross-ownership even today isn't the greatest thing in the world. I do think we are less well served as a democracy if there aren't enough voices. And I think the FCC proposal will cut down dramatically on the voices. In fact, I think the problem is the voices won't even be from Wisconsin. WTMJ is from Wisconsin. They would be more likely to be California, New York, or overseas.
We want to talk about jobs, manufacturing jobs, the economy. We have 30 seconds to talk about this. Obviously very important in Wisconsin. What are you doing in Washington to help out here at home?
Probably the biggest issue in Wisconsin right now. Everybody is talking about manufacturing job loss. I voted against the trade agreements that sent the jobs overseas. How do we reverse it? Strengthen the Buy American Act to make sure the government buys American products, have minimum standards for trade agreements in the future, and pass Senator Howling's bill that will create incentives for those who stay here and disincentives for those who leave. That's three things that I'm working on to try to stop the job loss, which I am very troubled by.
All right, Senator Russ Feingold, thanks.
Thank you.
I know there's a lot of coal still left, and if they can use that to produce energy in a way that doesn't pollute the environment, well, of course, that's fair.
I think that there's a lot of information out there that actually suggests nuclear power is a viable option. I know that there's a nuclear plant down in Cordova that supplies northern Illinois with a lot of energy, and it's very inexpensive.
Obviously our demand is increased and we need to find other ways. I'd be interested in talking about conservation a little bit and alternative resources.
A man by the name of Steven Avery was released from prison last week after spending the last 18 years behind bars for a crime he didn't commit. Attorneys with the UW Law School's Innocence Project worked to free him, using DNA testing of evidence to make it happen. Steven Avery, thanks very much for joining us out of Green Bay.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, it's been about a week now since you've been a free man. How's it going?
Well, it's going pretty good. There's a lot of different stuff around.
Yeah, like what?
So it's a little difficult. New buildings. And how you shop. It's
how you shop?
Different.
What? Describe that.
Well, I bought some fog lights and some air shocks. And you got to run all over. And they punch it on a computer. And like it used to be, you could just get them right away. You know, now it's kind of tough.
So what's the best part so far been of being out?
Doing whatever I want to do. I ain't got to listen to people in there and that.
What about...
Otherwise it was pretty tough.
Yeah. Yeah, and some of the simple pleasures, are there some that, you know, the rest of us take for granted that you're just enjoying to the hilt?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it'd be like something new. Just starting over from scratch. Like learning everything over again. So you got to start up from someplace.
Are you finding that pretty hard?
Yeah, most of the time. It's kind of hard.
A lot better than the alternative.
Different. Oh, yeah. A lot better.
So after the injustice of your conviction, did you ever really believe you were going to get out of prison?
Yeah, I never gave up hope, you know. Always had hope, you know, thinking about the kids and that, and that's mostly what got me through all of this.
You had hope, and yet you were turned back almost every single time until it came to the Innocence Project. What are your thoughts on those folks?
They're the best lawyers around. They did what they were supposed to do. The other lawyers didn't do nothing. They went so far, and that was it. I had more hope when I got the Innocence Project. And every time I talked to them, it was always good stuff. Not when they got so far, it just quit.
Now, we've just learned this afternoon that the Attorney General's office, the State Justice Department, is going to launch a review of what happened in your case. What do you think of that?
Oh, yeah, that's good. Maybe they can fix it a little bit.
What are your thoughts now that you've finally been exonerated and everyone knows you are and were innocent? What are your thoughts about the system, the process, what it did to you?
Oh, it screwed my whole life up. You know, now, when they first started the investigation, they didn't care who they had, as long as they had somebody. And then when they took the photo, they took it from my picture instead of from the victim. And I found that out yesterday from my uncle. Because he worked for the police department, so he knows a little bit what went on.
What happened?
When they drew the suspect, they took it off my picture and showed the victim.
Huh. So you're hopeful that the state investigation can fix the way your case and potentially others have been done in this state to save somebody else from going through what you went through?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, hopefully they can correct it and so it don't happen to somebody else. Because it's pretty tough.
You know, I think I read a quote from you saying that you want to make sure it doesn't happen to somebody else because they might not make it. Did you mean might not make it through prison? What did you endure there?
Oh, with the teasing and everything else, what you're in there for, you know, that's the worst crime you could have, you know. So you had to take the punishment and all of that. People talking and officers talking a little bit. So it gets kind of tough.
Your family, are you reconnecting with them now?
Yeah, little by little. I've seen 2 of my kids already. The twins I didn't even see, but my older boy I talked to. He's pretty decent now.
Well, those relationships were damaged forever, weren't they?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'll never get that back. I guess Steve put something in the paper that he didn't ever want to see me. So that hurt a little bit.
The state is talking about giving you, some people are talking about restitution money of up to $500,000. What do you think about that?
I don't think that's enough. I think I should get at least $1 million a year, at least.
Why?
You know, for everything I went through and lost my kids, and I had a divorce, and I always wanted to be married just once in my life. So that's never going to happen.
What's ahead for you?
I don't know right now. I might work at the junkyard, but I can't tell right now.
One day at a time?
Could be something different. Yeah.
All right. Steven Avery.
That's what I'm mostly doing.
Thanks very much to you. Good luck. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks.
Well, alternative renewable energies certainly have an appeal. They're probably more expensive at this point, but I think they should be developed for the future.
Well, it's obvious that it would be nice to have energy without using up things that would produce pollutants. So it'd be terrific if we could get an economical way to get sunlight, for instance, converted into energy. And I'm not sure that the technology's there, but if it would happen, that would be number one.
I'm the kind of person that not too much depend on technology kind of things. You know, I don't feel like electricity is a big deal for me. I mean, of course we need electricity, we need power, but I don't want to depend very much on, you know, like electricity. We have to learn, I mean, how to live in a very simple way, you know.
Back now to the Steven Avery case. A DNA test proved his innocence and set him free. These tests have become a latchkey for courts and jurors. With so much at stake in the outcome of the tests, many are concerned that Wisconsin's 3 crime labs that conduct the procedures are backlogged to the tune of over 2,000 cases. I spoke with State Attorney General Peg Lautenschlager about that and about her call today for a full Justice Department review into the Steven Avery case. Attorney General Peg Lautenschlager, thanks very much for being here.
It's a pleasure.
Now first, I guess I wanted to get your response to the fact that Steven Avery was, in fact, found innocent and released from prison after the Attorney General's office represented the prosecutors in the appeal of his case.
Well, that's a standard practice for us. It's one, the issues on appeal had nothing to do with the conviction. You know, you have to remember that the conviction was done at a time when things like photo lineups and the like were available, but where DNA evidence testing really was not. It was also the AG's office and our crime lab which indeed tested the evidence which was available for testing and something we could test when we did in order to exonerate him.
But now, after all of this, does your office intend to review exactly what did happen in this case?
We are going to do a review. Yesterday, the Manitowoc County District Attorney gave us a formal request asking us to look into the procedures and techniques that were used during the investigation and during the prosecution of the case. We have assigned 3 attorneys, 2 from our public integrity unit, the 2 attorneys there, and 1 from our criminal litigation division, a sex crimes expert, to help with that investigation. As well, we have investigators from our public integrity unit of our division of criminal investigation who will be going through, not to second guess, not to Monday night quarterback, but instead just to review the process and the procedure that was in place at the time and ensure that if there were irregularities, they be made public, and if there were not irregularities, that indeed the public know that.
So would there be something in the future perhaps where the Attorney General's office got involved in checking police practices in prosecutions?
What really happens is we try to get in on the front end through our Division of Law Enforcement Services, which includes our state crime labs, our Crime Information Bureau, and our law enforcement trainings and standards. What we try to do is ensure that our Training and Standards Board sets appropriate standards for police officers throughout the state, law enforcement officials throughout the state, and those standards are implemented by the board. They include required training, they include protocol that is suggested for various investigations and the like, and we are clearly in the forefront in that. And we do not have a state Civil Rights Act, which would be an act which would afford us the opportunity to investigate police abuses or mispractice. However, we do have the authority when requested by a district attorney to come in and investigate, and accordingly we're doing so in the Avery matter.
Well, do you suppose then that there were some problems there? I mean, given what I know about the case now, it was based on an eyewitness account, you know, the victim, and it sounded as though the investigatory work, you know, didn't go far enough. Obviously, it didn't.
Well, you have to remember, though, this was 1985, and indeed, an eyewitness account was all they had. Many times, cases, particularly involving sexual assault at the time, were a victim's word versus a defendant's word, somebody identifying someone. I'm not going to make any predispositions, I don't have any predispositions in terms of the correctness or incorrectness of the law enforcement work at the time, but to pretend that indeed mere eyewitness identification and a victim's word versus a defendant's word isn't sufficient for a conviction, I think would be a sad road to take, because if we were to do that, we would essentially eliminate many people. We would eliminate many people from the mix in terms of people who might with certainty see someone and know them to be their victimizer. So to draw a clear line in the sand, I think, would be inappropriate. One of the things I think we do need to discuss in a public forum, and I think attorneys on both sides of the criminal justice advocacy equation will get involved, is the issue of whether or not in Wisconsin expert witness testimony regarding the reliability of eyewitness testimony should be allowed in court. And that's one of the things that, frankly, in this case, it was allowed in, even though that's not the practice in the state.
Let's move along to the state crime labs.
Yes.
These days, eyewitness testimony is perhaps even not as important as physical evidence, and DNA is a big part of that, obviously.
We have two areas that are growing incredibly. Actually, our state crime labs work is increasing significantly in all sorts of areas, but the two areas involving identification of possible defendants is in fingerprint technology, which is advancing like crazy as well, and as well DNA technology and what we're able to do there.
You need more money.
We need more money. We need more help. You know, we fought like crazy during this last budget cycle to maintain the resources we have, and we were fortunate to be able to keep those. But we hope that in the future, given the backlogs we have, given cases like this, that those involved in the state budget process will recognize the need to have sufficient staffing at what are very good state crime labs.
Very briefly, what do the backlogs mean to justice in Wisconsin?
Well, what they mean is we have, for example, 340 DNA cases in our Madison office waited to be tested. It means 196 in our Milwaukee office. We tend to prioritize the cases based on what needs to go to court immediately, the severity of the incidents, that kind of thing. Two of our biggest contributors to our backlog right now when it comes to DNA testing are what are called cold crime cases, where old evidence that has never been tested for DNA crimes may be tested now. Some of those, most of those crimes do not have a defendant, but they are crimes where we think that with DNA testing, a defendant might be located. The other area, of course, is one like Mr. Avery's, and that's indeed where we have defendants who would like to have the evidence tested.
Right. Like very much. All right,
Yep.
Peg Lautenschlager, thanks very much.
Pleasure to be here.
This weekend, the Miss America pageant has an opportunity to update its image by about 50 years. That is, if they crown Miss Wisconsin the winner. Dr. Tina Sauerhammer is a cellist. She won the performance competition in Atlantic City last night. She's a pediatrician who happened to graduate from the UW Medical School at the age of 22, and she knows an awful lot about her chosen platform: organ donation and transplants. And she is also really very nice. Here's what she told me last summer about her quest for the crown.
As a medical doctor, I do have a voice in implementing this platform, but as Miss Wisconsin, my voice is amplified and my audience is enlarged as well, and for that I'm so thankful and I'm so excited for this coming year.
Dr. Tina Sauerhammer, Miss Wisconsin, and this weekend, the next Miss America. Good luck, Tina, from all of us back here in the Badger State. That is our show for tonight. I'm Frederica Freiberg. Have a great weekend.